Hi, I'm Aarik Danielsen, Arts and Entertainment Editor at the Tribune. I'm here with James Owen, who is our film writer. And we just wanted to kick off a series that James is going to be doing here in August called Bad Movies Gone Good. Think about that for a minute. Bad Movies Gone Good. This month in August, he's going to be looking at films that probably most people would say are objectively not great, but maybe mine them for some things that are maybe a little more entertaining, a little more interesting than maybe would seem on first blush. So, first of all, I'm kind of curious how you think about these sorts of things. When you think about a movie being bad, is that simply a taste issue? Are there things that we can objectively point to and say, like, bad movies tend to have this in common?
I'm not looking at bad movies like, oh, I like this or I don't like this. It's usually, is this something that was overly ambitious, that missed the mark? Is this something that had studio interference, so it seems like there's something missing or there's something problematic with it? Was there just general problems with the execution of the film? Okay. So, you can sit here and argue and debate what's a good movie, what's a bad movie. If we're talking about a bad movie, that's what I think of. Okay. And I don't think of stuff like, oh, this is cheap, or oh, this looks like it's technically problematic, because there's lots of films that are bad in that way. But this is more about, did someone have this idea in mind and they came short?
Yeah. Okay, so kind of a missing the mark based on what the mark was.
Right.
Yeah.
Because I think, even if you're talking about a good film, an ambitious film that doesn't even really work still has a lot of relevance and can still be useful for an audience member.
Sure. So when we talk about this idea of these sorts of movies going good, just tell me a little bit about what that title means to you and kind of how that's going to lead you as you do these columns.
I think when you look at those films that don't make their mark, or they certainly have an ambition, or they are trying to maybe even intentionally, as in one case, look like a bad movie, but you see where there's value as far as what this was saying about the culture at the time it was made, or about what they thought the composite of their audience was going to be in reacting to something like this. I mean, sometimes those can be useful in just trying to figure out where were we artistically when something came out. Why does this matter then? Why does it matter now? Which, I mean, sometimes even good films don't even really age that well, but when you're looking at what an artist is trying to say and how they're trying to say it to their audience member, that I think has a lot more resonance.
Yeah.
So that's when you say a bad movie can go good, is because it still remains something that's worthwhile to watch, think about, write about.
Sure. So
that's why I think that's where that came from.
Okay. And so the first entry in this, which goes online today, Wednesday, it'll be in Thursday's newspaper, is on the '97 film Starship Troopers.
Yes.
What are some of the other movies that you think you'll be looking at, and kind of how did you use what you just said to kind of pick a few from probably lots of opportunities there?
Right, yeah, because there's a lot of movies that, because we're looking at movies that are probably, we don't have any that are very new. Because I think that when you look at movies that have resonated, you still got to go back 10 years, 15 years, 20 years, and looking at films that certainly have a certain message. I mean, next week, you think a lot about people's ideas about corporatism and media saturation. A movie that always sticks out in my mind is I always laugh when I say it. It's called Pootie Tang.
Right.
And Louis C.K. directed this, and it came out about 15 years ago, and Chris Rock was involved with it. It was a mess. I mean, the studio absolutely hijacked it, edited it. It doesn't look like anything that I think was intended, but still has some, I think, meaningful, relevant social commentary in that. Yeah. Looking at other films that kind of have been maligned by the idea that critics and audiences were going after the star that was involved with them. I think that's something that we touched on a couple weeks ago with the story about The Rock and being the last movie star left. Looking at movies like Hudson Hawk or Freddy Got Fingered, which is a Tom Green film, and looking about how people were more judging those films based on the actors and their and what people thought of them versus whether the films were good or not.
Sure.
Also, a movie that we spent a little bit of time talking about just in developing this idea was looking at Kevin Smith's films, which I think he's a brilliant writer. He's not a great director, which I think sometimes makes his films kind of get a bad rap. And looking at his movies like Mallrats, which was really great dialogue focused film, but then also looking at a movie of his that nobody really talks about called Red State, which is a really great film about cultism and politics in our modern time, and I think a lot of people are really shocked when they find out it's a Kevin Smith film.
Yeah.
So those are just some films that I that stick out in my mind that I think are going to be useful when people are reading this, thinking, oh yeah, maybe that's worth checking out, or maybe that's just interesting to think about some of those things.
Yeah, yeah. Side note, I spent about 20 minutes on the phone one time interviewing Tom Green. Surprisingly thoughtful guy.
He's great. He's a great interviewer.
Yeah.
You know, Rip Torn, who is now passed away, he was in that film, and Tom Green directed it. And Rip Torn, who has worked with Michael Mann, has worked with a lot of really great directors, said Tom Green was the best director he ever worked with.
That's really interesting.
Yeah.
It's quite a. I'll have to think about that for a minute.
Think about that for a minute. That's a big statement. And he worked with Curtis Hanson, all these people. Yeah.
Okay, Tom Green, great director. We'll maybe get into that a little bit more. I guess one other thing to talk about is just you mentioned maybe folks will either revisit some of these films or maybe for the first time see one of these movies. How do you think some of the stuff you're going to be talking about in your pieces will kind of maybe help them see them with new eyes?
Well, I think you've really got to look at. To me, I think it really comes down to, with a lot of films, like the personality of the filmmaker and what their story is, what their history is, and why that matters now. I think you can make that argument with just about any movie because the director is an author of a film, and so if you know more about them, you know kind of what they're going for. Even if their film doesn't do what maybe they wanted it to do, you can still see where that matters, and you can still see why that might have interesting things to think about. I mean, Starship Troopers is a good example of that because it's another movie that talks a lot about war.
Yeah.
It talks a lot about deference to authority. And I think that's something that still is something that's probably more relevant than it was even when it came out in 1997, when everyone in the 1990s wanted, everything was great and fine and happy, and nobody really wanted to have any kind of cynical tinge to their entertainment. And so I think now maybe that is probably a good time to revisit it.
Okay. Yeah. Well, we've got a lot to revisit. You can revisit these films in James's columns throughout the month of August. Bad Movies Gone Good. Look for them online at ColumbiaTribune.com and every Thursday in our After Hours section. Thanks, James.
Thank you, Aarik.
Yeah.